Why would you want to go hungry, even temporarily? Because it's really good for you. I remember when I first met my wife 37 years ago, she would occasionally go on a fast. So she would just go without eating for sometimes a week at a time, sometimes 2 weeks. I mean, she would sometimes drink juice, but basically she went without eating for long periods of time. And I thought that was a terrible idea. I was determined to find out what I could that was known scientifically about fasting so I could prove to her that she should stop doing this. I didn't really know anything about fasting, except that when I was in high school, I remember, I think, a health class or something mainly talking to girls, that you should not go without eating because it's really bad for you. And then when you start eating again, you gain the weight that you were trying to lose and you gain some extra. It's just a bad idea. And that's about all I knew about fasting. And so anyway, I started with the two books that she had read, because she'd read a couple of books many years before that convinced her that fasting was a good idea. So I started there. There were two books, both by the same guy, Alan Cott, a doctor. One's called Fasting as a Way of Life, and one's called Fasting: The Ultimate Diet. And they're both actually very readable, short books about fasting, but there was really nothing scientific in there. It was all anecdotes, people's stories about what it was like to fast and how it changed their life sometimes. But I mean, it was amazing stuff that they were talking about, these testimonies of people. They fasted and their tumor went away. They fasted and they became healthier in some dramatic way. But there was nothing convincing about it. Or to me anyway. I was looking for something scientific, some proof, some studies that must have been done on fasting. This is back in the late 80s. I was looking for studies, and I had, this is before the internet, so or before I had access to the internet, and I could not find anything scientific about it. I read another book by Paul Bragg about fasting. Same thing. It was a bunch of testimonials and not one shred of scientific anything. And so anyway, I kept looking, went to the library, found books, but they were all of this kind. There's a whole tradition of fasting, from like fasting clinics, where people go and they will fast for a couple weeks at a time or a month, and they're being supervised by fasting experts that have had their wisdom handed down, because people have been fasting since the beginning of time, probably, or it's the beginning of human beings anyway. I mean, it was, I'm sure, originally completely involuntary, but people had found over the centuries that sometimes remarkable health effects came from fasting. So clinics formed that supervised, and there were people that were experienced with guiding people through fasts. So people would go there and they would feel rejuvenated. They'd lose a bunch of weight. They would, feel healthy. Sometimes problems like high blood pressure would go away. People that had diabetes, sometimes that would go in remission, or I don't know what you call that. They became not diabetic, and things like that. People would go there for all kinds of health reasons. But to my mind, this was not proof. I had no idea if these supposed health effects were coming from just the placebo effect or from some other thing, like because they're not eating for a while, they're just resting and relaxing, and maybe that had some positive effect on them, or maybe just because normally they had a lot of drink and rich food or something, just going without that for a little while was somehow beneficial to them. Or I had no idea, but I didn't believe it. I didn't. I mean, some of the stories, anecdotes, and testimonials were really outrageous to me. They seemed really far-fetched. Like, how could doing one thing affect so many things, like heart disease and cancer? It seemed over the top, like impossible. So I kept looking. Then one day, my brother sent me an article that was a study done on mice, where they just basically fed the mice one day, let them eat whatever they wanted, and the next day they didn't feed them anything. The next day they could eat whatever they wanted. Next day they didn't get anything. And the mice lived a lot longer. This was the first scientific study I ever saw on fasting. But I was not entirely convinced by this. I mean, that is a pretty extreme thing to do, not eat at all one day and eat whatever you want the next day, every day for your whole life. That seemed really an extreme thing and that human beings are not going to do. But anyway, it kind of piqued my interest and I kept looking. And eventually I found more and more scientific studies and more were being done. And the studies have validated what these anecdotes had been saying, that it can really be good for heart disease, it can lower blood pressure, it can help diabetics, it can reduce your chance of cancer even, because the cancer is interesting because one of the things that your body does when you're fasting is it goes through and eliminates faulty cells that really are not functioning very well. So, for example, one of the things it does, one of the studies showed that when you do a 3-day fast, just don't eat anything for 3 days and then start eating, what they find is during the fast, during the 3 days, your body is killing white blood cells, which doesn't sound like a good idea, but it's going after the white blood cells that are old or not functioning very well and leaves the healthy, vigorous ones alone. And then when you eat again, your body replaces all of those killed white blood cells with fresh, new, vigorous ones. So they found that it's a good boost to your immune system, your immune vitality, to go for a 3-day fast. That's just one example. A whole bunch of studies have been done on what it does, what your body is actually doing while you're fasting. It goes into a state of extreme rejuvenation. It goes after things that are wrong in your body, and it stimulates DNA repair, which is probably one of the main reasons why it affects cancer. Because when DNA gets a little haywire, it can cause cancer. So it goes through, your body is just going through looking for cells that are not quite right and either eliminating them or repairing the DNA in those cells. If you'd like to read more about the science of this sort of thing, I recommend a really good book called Fasting, An Exceptional Human Experience by Randy Fredericks. And also, she has compiled all the best studies on fasting to the date when she wrote that book. And then there's another really good book that goes into the science of what happens when you fast. It's called The Fasting Path by Stephen Herod Buhner. So over the years of reading more and more studies about fasting, I became convinced that it is actually a good idea to fast. And I stopped trying to talk my wife out of doing it. But I felt like I couldn't do it. And I've noticed this about when I've talked to other people about fasting and how good it is for you. You know, most people, when I talk to them, they're like, they're just against it. They just think it can't possibly be good for you to do that. But then once I share with them some of the studies done and, you know, what science knows about what it does to your body, even when they become convinced that fasting is good for you, the next thing they have is, well, I couldn't do it. And I had the same experience. It's like, yeah, okay, it may be good for you, but I don't think I could do it. I just don't think I could do it. So when I first started doing it, I only did, like the first time I did it, I just did a 24-hour fast, which is where you just, you know, say you have lunch and then you don't eat again until tomorrow's lunch. It's one of the easiest fasts to do. And as a matter of fact, this fast, a 24-hour fast, one of the other studies have been done on Mormons was apparently there's a practice in Mormonism that you once a month you go do a 24-hour fast. So you're basically skipping 2 meals. And then you donate the money that you would have spent on those 2 meals to charity. That's one of the things that Mormons are supposed to do. So one of the researchers thought this would be a great group to study. So they studied Mormons. Half the Mormons that they studied did this practice every month, and half the Mormons they studied did not do this practice. And they were still Mormons. They did the other things, like they didn't smoke, they didn't drink and stuff like that, but they didn't do this fasting part of it. And so they could just compare these two groups and they matched them up, you know, age and, you know, sex and, whatever. And what they found was the ones that did this once a month, 24-hour fast, had 40% less heart disease. A huge result for such a small thing. Anyway, so that was my first fast, was just 24 hours. And I was actually surprised. It was easier than I thought it was going to be. So then I went a full day, sometime later after I recovered from that, or, got my nerve up again. I went a full day. So that means, I ate dinner, and then I didn't eat anything the next day. And then I ate breakfast the following day. So it's like, I don't know what that is, 36-hour fast. And that, again, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Then I did another couple of those, but I tried one at work. And at the time I worked in a restaurant, and so I was around food, and that was actually pretty hard. And plus, it's a physically active job. And one of the things that I've discovered from doing fasts, I've done a bunch of them since then. One of the things I discovered is that I don't really like to be active when I'm fasting. Some people have no problem with it. My wife has no problem with it. She can be running around. She can exercise even. She can do all kinds of stuff. I just feel tired, not tired, but I feel completely out of energy. And when I have tried to do physical work while I'm fasting, I really don't feel good. It is a very unpleasant thing for me. But if I'm just kicking back, if it's a day off and I'm just relaxing, watching movies or whatever, it's really not that bad. You do get periods of time when you feel hungry, or you feel weak, or you feel like you have no energy. But it's not that unpleasant. And you also have long periods of time where you don't have any sensation of anything, like you get involved in something. Especially if you just get involved in something like reading a book or, watching a movie or something, you forget for long periods of time that you're even fasting. And a lot of times, you feel this wave of hunger, and if you just have a glass of water, it passes. What I found since then is that there's a hormone that stimulates your hunger. It's called ghrelin or something like that. It's a hormone that causes your body to feel hungry, and it rises as you're getting close to mealtime, and then it drops again after the mealtime passes. So they've measured this level of this hormone in your blood. It's hunger hormone on people that are fasting. What they find is that it rises at what your normal mealtime would be. It rises. It starts stimulating your stomach juices and your saliva. And then after the mealtime would be over, it drops again and then rises again at the next mealtime. But what they found is after the third day, it stops rising so much. Your body starts getting used to the fact that you're fasting. And also, it takes about 3 days on average for most people. It varies a lot, but for most people, it takes about 3 days to really shift over to ketosis, which is a state of fat burning rather than carbohydrate burning. And, because your body has to shift over to that different fuel source. There are apparently enzymes inside the cells. There are mechanisms inside the cells that generate energy, and they are right now in most people that are eating, whatever, 200 carbs a day or 300 carbs a day. That's the main fuel source. So the cells in your body are used to burning carbs, and so they have all whatever they need inside the cell to burn carbs. The mitochondria are set up to burn carbs. So when you're shifting over and you're running out of carbs, which you pretty much run out of carbs by the first day, because you have glucose stored in your liver, or glycogen stored in your liver and in your muscles. So you have a certain amount, and you can go for some period of time without eating carbs, and you still are burning carbs. And then you start to run out, and then your body has to start shifting over. And it takes a few days. Although it seems like we've been experimenting with fasting for a long time, and it seems like your body gets better at shifting over. We don't know. I haven't never seen any explanation of this. I've never actually, in all the books that I've read about and all the studies I've read about it, I've never seen anybody write about this. But we have experienced it ourselves. That because you can measure whether you're in ketosis or not. There are these they're called keto sticks, or they're little long strips that have a little something on the end of them, and you pee on it, and then it changes color depending on how deep into ketosis you are. So how much you're shifted over to fat burning. And there's basically 5 levels, 5 color. It's like a color chart on the side of the bottle. You pull it out, you pee on it, and it changes color. If it doesn't change color, you're not in ketosis at all. But if it changes color, there's like 5 little blocks of color, and you can match it up to that. It gets darker and darker and darker depending on how deep in ketosis you are. And all it's measuring is acetone. So here's the deal: you have lipids in your fat cells, and you normally don't really burn that much of it. If you eat plenty of carbohydrates, you don't normally burn very much fat. Matter of fact, the carbohydrates stimulate insulin, which causes your body, basically, if you have enough carbs and insulin in your system, your body makes sure that you don't burn any fat. And if there's any extra, it helps to store that. But anyway, as soon as you start running out of carbs, then you start having to access those fat cells. Well, while you still have a few carbs, you can burn those fat cells, the lipids, the fats in your cells completely. But then as you start running out of carbs, you start burning your fat incompletely. So there's 3 elements that your body can use in the fat. And one of the elements is acetone. But if you don't have any carbs, you can't burn the acetone, and so you just pee it out and breathe it out, actually. So your body just gets rid of the acetone. So about roughly a third of the calories that are in your fat cells are not being utilized; they're just being wasted because you have no carbs to burn it with. So that is the measurement of the keto sticks: is that they're measuring the amount of acetone in your pee. So in other words, we can know with a fair degree of certainty how much we are in ketosis. And when we first started doing this, it did take 2-3 days to really get into some, level 4 or level 5 ketosis. But we've noticed that over time we get there sooner. I'm fasting right now, and I'm on my 4th day. And by the 2nd day, I was at level 4 ketosis, which is, that's the fastest I ever remember that happening. So we're not sure, but it seems like the body gets better at getting into ketosis. Of course, part of it may be that we've over time, we've tended to eat less carbohydrates. We still do, but we eat less. And we've actually found that it seems to be an easier transition into fasting to eat lower carb at least a few days before we start fasting. And so we've been doing that, and maybe that's it. Maybe you're already like halfway to ketosis when you start fasting, and so you go into ketosis faster. Maybe that's what's happening. Every fast is different, and people are different the way they respond to fasting. So every fast seems like an experiment to us when we're doing it. Like, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes it's really pleasant, sometimes it's fairly unpleasant. And by the way, I'm not a doctor. I have no credentials to be recommending fasting to you. I'm just telling you what I've found out just from doing it and from reading about it. There's plenty of doctors that are actually versed in fasting and can help you fast. One of the things they do in those clinics I was telling you about is they often have MDs in there and working in those clinics that are experts on fasting. And one of the things they do is they check your potassium levels. I think they check other things, but one of the things I know for sure that they check is your potassium levels, because if they get too low, it can cause cramps and it can cause problems. I mean, it can probably kill you if you get low enough potassium. But anyway, they monitor it while you're in these things. And you can do that with a regular doctor. You don't have to go to a clinic to do this. You can find a doctor that's a specialist in fasting, and they can make sure that this is not dangerous, because it is potentially dangerous to fast, or at least a lot of MDs think it's dangerous. I've never been to one. I've never done where I'm like being monitored by a doctor while I'm fasting. But because in my opinion, it's an extremely natural thing. I mean, it's been involuntary for most of our ancestors' history. They've fasted involuntarily. but it has happened throughout history for probably back hundreds of millions of years. I mean, probably every animal that's ever existed spent some time going hungry. And it feels like when you're fasting, you have, it feels like your body knows what to do. It feels like you have evolved to be able to do this. And I believe that it's a very, it's something that has always happened, and the body is very good at dealing with it. And it actually utilizes that time of fasting to do good things. I think it's been such a steady and expected thing that the body waits until you are fasting to do things like clean out your veins and clean out your repair your DNA. And I mean, I know your body does repair DNA anyway, but it does like a deep cleaning when you're fasting. And I think it accumulates things that it's kind of waiting for you to go without food. And then now we're in the modern era and we have agriculture, and we sometimes, some of us, almost never go without food. And so, and I think that's a lot of modern diseases are because of that. There's this natural thing that has been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, and now we've bypassed that natural feature. That's just my opinion, though. That there's a lot. I mean, I've read a lot of scientific data about this, and a lot of other kind of information about this that leads me to make this conclusion. But that is just my opinion. That is not a fact. Well, it may be a fact, but I'm just telling you my opinion. I'll tell you a couple of historical things that kind of led me to think that this is a very natural thing. One was in the book Catching Fire, where he talked about, when they've studied hunter-gatherer societies, researchers have found that most hunter-gatherers go for periods of time where they're hungry, where they're not getting enough food. It's usually seasonal, and it's a totally common thing. As a matter of fact, I think he said that there has never been any societies that they've ever studied that were hunter-gatherer societies that didn't have this, that didn't go through periods of famine. So I think, that leads me to think that it's a very natural thing. Humans have always been through these periods of not enough food or no food. And animals before us that we evolved from had the same thing. All animals, I think, have this. It's a very natural, common thing for all animals, I think. And another line of validation for this idea I got was, for a while I read a whole series of books that are about basically white people who were captured by Indians, Native Americans, and then returned to civilization. So for a time, most of them were captured by the Lakota or the Plains Indians, who were hunter-gatherers. So basically, modern people relatively modern, 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, they were captured by Indians and then lived with them for a period of time as a slave, or as sometimes just living. They were adopted as a kind of a captive Indian, basically. They became Indians. But they lived that way for sometimes years. I think the longest one I saw, the guy he was basically an Indian for 9 years. And then he was returned to white people. And then they wrote down their stories, or people wrote down their stories for them. So these are really interesting books because you get a first-hand account of what it was like inside a hunter-gatherer society. A very successful and evolved hunter-gatherer society. I mean, the Plains Indians were probably at the pinnacle of hunter-gatherer societies in the world. They really had it down. So you got to see what life was like inside these. So there's, one of the books is by a guy named Scott Zesch, called The Captured. And another one was it's by John Cremeny, Life Among the Apaches. And another one was called Captured by the Indians, 15 First-Hand Accounts. One of the things that I came across when I was reading these books is many times they talked about, like I remember this white guy was captured, and then they were being chased by Texas Rangers or by the cavalry or something. These Indians with their captives were just hauling, just getting out of there. They would ride for 7 days straight without stopping to eat. And the white guys really remarked on this. Every time they mentioned it, when the Indians were going for long periods of time without eating, these white guys had never had an experience like that. It really stuck out for them. So they wrote about it. It was part of everybody that experienced that commented on it. And it was a very common thing. These Indians would go without food, sometimes voluntarily, for a week at a time or longer. So anyway, that was another example of it made it seem like it must have been a very natural thing throughout our evolution as human beings, at least, and probably much long before that. It was a very natural thing to go periods of time without food. So if your body is expecting this, if it's expecting you to go without food, and it does certain functions only when you're in that state of without food, like it goes through, like basically it's going through looking for proteins, looking for amino acids in your body, and also utilizing the fat on your body to keep you alive. And it goes a long way in sparing muscle. Like muscles and organs are sort of off limits. It can use a little bit of muscle. They've figured out exactly how much, but it's like, a quarter of an ounce or something a day. It uses a little bit of muscle when it needs some amino acids and stuff like that. But other than that, it tries its best to go through your body and look for cells that aren't that great anyway, like weak white blood cells, and takes them apart and uses those amino acids. That's what it's doing. I had an experience a couple of times where I had like a little lump on my surface of my skin on my hand, and another little, just kind of like a little knot or a little something, almost like a little BB under my skin on my neck, and they disappeared when I fasted and stayed disappeared. Most of the time you can't tell what it's doing inside your body, what cells it's getting rid of while you're fasting. But that happened to be something on the surface that I knew was there, and then I saw it disappear right after a fast, or even during the fast. So apparently it's doing this all throughout your body. It's called lysing, where your body other cells in your body go up to a weak white blood cell, and it opens the cell up and then empties it of its amino acid contents, takes it to the liver, and it manufactures other things that you need. Now, if it normally doesn't do this while you're in a fed state, then this kind of deep rejuvenation isn't happening except when you go without food. And we sometimes go without food anyway. Like people who are preparing for a colonoscopy have to go without food for, I don't know what it is, 24 hours before the surgery, so that's a little fast. And sometimes if you get really sick, food poisoning or something like that, you go without food for, you just don't want to eat. And it's actually one of the things that I've noticed. There's a psychological thing to get over from fasting, because really the only time that you ever go without food and feel that sensation of hunger is all bad. Like when you're a kid and you're, sent to bed without dinner or whatever, or when you're sick and you just don't feel like eating. Part of the sensation that you had when you were sick and not eating was the sensation of hunger. It's the sensation of fasting. So when you do it, you have this, it's almost like you feel like you're in an emergency psychologically. The sensation has only been associated with negative things in the past. And part of the process, I think, of learning to fast is psychologically getting over that and starting to associate this sensation with all the positive things that happen. And I recommend that you go through and you read about some of the studies that have been done on people who fast, or some of the effects that fasting can have, and then remember those while you're fasting. Like this sensation I have right now, and I have it right now. I'm on my 4th day of a fast. That sensation is the feeling of your body cleansing itself, of repairing DNA, of cleaning out the veins, of another factor that I haven't even mentioned yet is they found that a guy named Mark Mattson has done some of the most, I think, interesting research on fasting. He works for the National Institute of Health, and he's specifically working on Alzheimer's. But he does a lot of studies on fasting because it's had some effects that indicate that it would be beneficial for somebody that is worried about getting Alzheimer's. But anyway, one of the things that he said is that they found out that that ketones, which is what you have circulating in your blood when you're in ketosis, those ketones stimulate your brain to make more brain cells. And somebody asked him about that and said, well, why would that happen? He said, well, obviously, if you're going without food, you may not be smart enough to find food. And so that would be a good adaptive response. It's like, you better get smart, and you better get smart fast because you need to get some food, right? So it would be a good adaptive response. So anyway, but however, whatever the logic of the DNA is, that is the fact. It does other things that would be beneficial for somebody to prevent Alzheimer's too. He's got a really good TED Talk I recommend. I think it is something like Fasting and Alzheimer's. Or Mark Mattson is his name. One of the things that they've also found, scientists have found, is that it can lower your blood sugar level, and it can lower your blood pressure, and it can often stay low after the fast. I mean, obviously, it may have an effect while you're fasting, because one of the first things that happens when you start fasting is you lose about 2, 3, 4 pounds of water weight almost immediately within a couple of days. And then you start losing fat pounds. It seems like you lose roughly a half pound to a pound of fat per day. I was thinking about how I could think about the fat that I'm burning while I'm fasting. And I realized that a pound of fat, because it seems like I lose about a pound of fat a day when I'm fasting, or close to that. And I was looking at a pound of butter, which is basically a pound of fat, is about 3,000 calories, which is a lot. And I tend to be very non-active when I'm fasting, so I'm doubtfully burning 3,000 calories a day. However, if you realize part of that is not being burned, but just being peed out and breathed out as acetone. So maybe, let's say that's a third of that pound of butter. So that's 2,000 calories. That's about a normal amount of calories to burn for an adult. So basically, you lose about a pound a day, or half pound to a pound a day of fat. I saw a documentary once that this father and son made of their experience going to one of those fasting clinics. And they both had health problems. They were both overweight. And that's why they went there. It was great because they kept filming themselves throughout their time. And they fasted for, I think it was 30 days. It was something very close to that, if not exactly that. No food at all, water only. And because I say that because some fasts, they call them fasts, but you're still getting some calories. But these guys did water only fasts. They did, and this is a fasting clinic. This is what they do. That's all they do, is they help people through fasts. And they have this whole protocol where you eat lighter, cleaner foods, vegetables and fruits, and then you eat less, and then you start fasting. And then you basically just kind of wander around the grounds without doing much, and just lie in bed and read and just really kick back, take it easy for the time. And so these guys were, they would do like a video diary, and you'd see and you could, in this one documentary, you can see these guys losing weight, looking better, and having sometimes going, I'm really hungry, and sometimes going, you know what, this isn't so bad, and I actually feel pretty good today. And that's been my experience too when I'm fasting. It's, sometimes it's not so bad at all, and sometimes it really doesn't feel good at all. But one of the things that my wife has taught me is that, you don't have to be all or nothing about this. And I have a tendency to be all or nothing about things, or gung-ho about things. And so when I first started doing this, I thought, well, I'll go water only fast, because, there's also such thing as a juice fast where you drink juice every day. Not very much, but say, it can add up. It can be a lot of calories, 600 calories a day of juice. It's still way less. I mean, you normally burn, I don't know, 1,500 to 2,500 calories a day. So that's way less than a normal. That is definitely not enough calories. But I've always admired the water only fast. It seems so hardcore and so pure, and also so natural. It doesn't seem natural that you would just get 600 calories of juice every day. That just doesn't seem like something that would ever happen in the natural world. More likely, you just not have any food, or you'd have something really small, like you maybe eat some grass or leaves of a tree or something, whatever you could find, but it wouldn't be much, and so you'd be basically fasting. And that's the thing that my wife taught me, is that you can actually just eat a little of something if you start feeling really bad. So her philosophy is that she doesn't want to discourage herself from fasting in the future. So instead of suffering, she will do something like she'll just have a piece of cheese, just a little piece of cheese. She'd be she'd have 3 days of fasting with nothing, and then start to feel like yucky, and she'll just have a piece of cheese, or she'll have a little bit of chicken broth, or even sometimes a little juice. And at first I didn't like that. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be hardcore. I wanted to be able to say, I just did 3 days of water only. But I saw that it really benefited her. And one day I was doing a fast. I think I was on my second day, and I really didn't feel well at all. And I was thinking just breaking the fast. And she said, well, hold on, because I wanted to go longer than that. She's like, why don't you just have a little something, have a little juice, and see if that does it, and see if you can just then keep going. And I did, and I was able to go another day or two, and I only had like an eighth of a cup of juice, but it was just enough. And I think sometimes that's all you need, just a little something, and then you can go longer. And I've also had the philosophy, or I started out with the philosophy, that I'm somehow making myself do this. And so I've got to grit my teeth and bear down and determine how long I'm going to go, and just make myself go that long no matter what. And now I'm coming to her point of view, which is, you don't have to do that. I actually want all the benefits that come from fasting. I don't have to make myself do this. And if it's such a miserable experience, I can be discouraged from doing it again. I think twice about wanting to do that again, because it was so miserable. When you can do something so small, and it can, like it just happened today, actually. I woke up this morning. This is the fourth day. This is Friday. Last time I ate was dinner on Monday, right? So, and I haven't done anything. I haven't done absolutely anything but water since then. And I'm hoping to go 10 days. It's kind of what I'm thinking of doing. I've never gone that far before. The longest I've ever done is 4.5 days. And the last time I did that, when I got into the fourth day, I felt actually pretty good. And I could have gone longer, but I had to go to work. So I stopped the thing. I was scheduled it off. I was going to do 6 days, but then they called me into work on the fifth day. So I only got 4.5 days. And but I felt really good, and I felt like I could easily have gone 6 days. And so I was expecting this morning to feel much better, and I really didn't feel well at all this morning. I was like, ugh, and I was really seriously thinking of stopping it. But then I thought, no, I'll just because I had a kind of a craving for electrolytes. We have these electrolyte tabs called Nuun, Nuun, and you just put them in plop one in a glass of water, and it fizzes and turns into this slightly sweet drink that is got calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium, so the electrolytes. And I thought, when I was going to bed last night, I thought about having one of those, and I was like, no, I want to be pure, but when I woke up this morning, I didn't feel good at all. So I had one, and it's got 15 calories, 2 grams of carbs, and I felt a lot better after I drank it. And I was still fasting. I thought, I'm just going to drink this, see how I feel, and then if I feel okay, I'll just keep fasting. And I did. And then tonight, she was having a cup of chicken broth, and it smelled so great. Oh my God. And it's just, she basically just take chicken bouillon and put it in a cup of hot water and let it dissolve, and you got a little chicken broth. Right, which is probably a little bit. It's probably got calcium in it, because most chicken broth is made with, they boil bones and stuff. So it's probably got some calcium in it. Probably got some Well, it's got sodium for sure. It's salty. So it's at least got two of those. And it's just smelled so good. I was like, I have to try some. So I had some of that. So I probably had another 10 calories. So today I had 25 calories and I feel way better than I did last night and this morning. And now I feel like I can just keep going. So I made it less unpleasant, and I didn't abort the project, you know. I have this time off from work. As I'm doing this, we're in the middle of the coronavirus, the shelter in place deal. And so I have this time, and I normally, I mean, I've wanted to go on a long fast before, but I don't really want to work while I'm fasting. So, I mean, when have I had the opportunity to have 10 days off in a row? I thought I should take advantage of this. So that's why I'm going for 10 days, if I can, you know, if I want to. Actually, if I still feel good, I'm going to try to go 15 days or whatever. Apparently, when you run out of your fuel, you know, when the fat on your body, when you run out and it starts to actually go into your muscle, every record that I've read about this says that there is no doubt in your mind when you hit that place, you become suddenly extremely hungry. Apparently, I will know when it's time to stop this fast. But anyway, I'd like to go 10 or 15 days if I can. So I would definitely recommend, if you're going to do a fast, to have that attitude of, you know, you can always do a little something if you really do feel that bad. Try to go without it if you can do it. You know, just rest or something. Just lie down and read a book for a while if you're feeling not that good. Because it does come and go. It comes in waves where you feel really like, I feel super hungry. And then an hour later, you don't feel that way. Sometimes even 10 minutes later, you don't feel that way. Sometimes you just have a glass of water and you don't feel that way anymore. So, you know, if you can postpone those things, like don't immediately jump on doing something like that. But if you do feel bad and it's not going away, you can just try a little something. And I remember the first time we tried this, she had been fasting for a while. I don't know what it was, like maybe a week. And her back muscles started to ache. And she didn't know what that was about. So she got in a hot bath and it made it feel better. But as soon as she got out of the bath, it ached, like it wouldn't go away. And it just ached. So I was thinking, I had been reading a lot about it. And I thought, well, maybe she's low on sodium or potassium. And we had some tomato juice, which happens to be high in both of those, sodium and potassium. So I suggested to her that she just have a little bit of tomato juice and see if that doesn't take care of it. And it did. It relieved her of that. And she's done it before, too, when she's had like some kind of, like when she doesn't feel good or something like that. She'll have a little chicken broth and it goes away. It's fine. Like maybe she just needed salt or calcium or something. I have not seen any studies on whether your cravings are related to what you need, but I have a feeling, and so does she, that if you're craving chicken broth or you're craving tomato juice or you're craving a Noon, the electrolyte drink, then that may be what you need. You know, maybe you're craving salt or you're craving potassium or something like that, because fruit juice tends to be high in potassium. We believe that the body sort of gives you a craving for what you need. So if you do feel bad and you have a particular craving, try a little and see if that doesn't take care of it and you can just go on. Which is another thing I'd like to pass on, that because I had the attitude of like, I'm just going to, you know, decide ahead of time how long I'm going to go, and no matter what, I'm going to get there. It had a kind of a stressful feel to it. And hers is a totally different. The way she thinks about it is, I'm going to try to go 6 days, but I'm not going to make myself suffer. So if I feel like I need to break this fast, I'll just break it any time. So she has this, and I've been doing this now too, this attitude of, I can stop this anytime. I could be actually, within 5 minutes from right now, I could be eating something. We have plenty of food in the house right now. And last night, actually, I was not feeling good at all. And I'm like, well, I could stop right now. I could eat something right now. And I've already done 3 days worth of really good for my body. And it's all to the good. There's no harm done. But because I had that out, I was able to relax and just go, well, maybe I'll feel better in a little while. And I just kept going. And I remember seeing a study once where they were talking about people who I think they were subjecting them to super loud noises, which is kind of stressful for people. They were seeing how long they could take it, I think. And they gave some of them a button that could stop it at any moment. And those that had the button could endure it longer because they knew they had an out. They could endure it. And that is my experience with fasting. that if you can tell yourself at a time when you don't feel good, it's okay. I could stop right now if I want. I could stop this anytime. Then you somehow it doesn't feel so stressful, and you can relax and you go, I still want to do this. So let me see if this goes away, because you find out that it does come in waves, and so sometimes it just goes away. Another thing I've gotten from my wife about this is that you can tell yourself also that when this is over, I will eat X. Like the other day, I was like, what am I craving right now? And I was craving tacos. So I said, okay, when this is over, 10 days from now or whenever it is, I'm going to have tacos for sure. I promise myself I will have tacos. Maybe not to break the fast, because it's something that especially the longer you fast, the more careful you should be in breaking the fast. Like, careful, I mean, in eating just a little bit at first, because your stomach stops producing juices. Your digestive system is kind of shuts down and goes into a sort of hibernation mode. And so when you start eating again, if you pig out right off the bat, people have the experience of, apparently it's very uncomfortable. Very, it's like the food sits in your stomach. It feels like it's rotting. It's not doing anything. So don't do that. So if when you break your fast, try something that's easy to digest, like an egg or a piece of watermelon or something. Just do a little bit, and it'll taste like the best thing you've ever tasted in your life. And then just wait for a little while. See how that sits with you. And you'll be in ecstasy anyway. I mean, especially if you've gone for any period of time. When I did that 4.5 day fast, I ate a piece of watermelon. It was like the most delicious thing I've ever eaten in my life. And I felt completely satisfied. And I just had one piece of watermelon. Anyway, so break the fast sort of easy. But anyway, the point I was making is that think in terms of, when you're really feeling hungry and you're really missing eating, say, I can have whatever I want when this is over, and decide what you want to have. Decide several things. Like, when this is over, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to have, cookies or milk or whatever it is that turns your crank. And you can have that, and you could have it now, but you'd have to stop this fast. And that would be a bummer, because you've already come this far. Or you can just say, I promise I will have it when I'm done fasting. And it gives you some relief and some control. You realize you're in control of this thing. So, I don't know, psychologically, it has made a difference to me. And maybe it'll make a difference to you too. Another thing that has really helped is to stay occupied, to be mentally occupied, but not mentally straining. This is just my experience in having the most pleasant fasting experience. Is I often, when I'm involved in something that produces flow, where I'm concentrated and absorbed in what I'm doing, that's somewhat a little bit challenging and my skills are up to it, like reading or making this podcast, for example. I've hardly thought at all about the fact that I'm hungry. I don't think I've even felt hungry while I've been doing this podcast. So if you're doing something that's absorbing your attention, it's a lot better. As soon as I'm like lying down trying to go to sleep or something, I start to become aware that I don't feel so good. Sometimes I feel fine, but I've just noticed it's, as long as I stay occupied mentally, it's fairly easy to do. But like I said, you don't want to be, my wife and I have both found that if you strain yourself or push yourself physically or mentally, especially in the first few days while you're transitioning over into ketosis, it can really feel not good at all. I don't even know how to describe it. It's a really, really unpleasant. I remember one time we went on a arduous hike on our first day of a fast, and both of us the next morning felt horrible. Like there was something, not sore muscles or anything, just our overall body. And I think what happened was we just blew out all our carbs, all our stored glycogen at once. And nothing had been shifted over to fat burning. And so we were basically, every cell in our body was jonesing for calories and not getting them. But whatever it was a terrible sensation. We ended up breaking the fast that next morning. And we've done that a couple of times where we kind of exerted ourselves a little too much in the first couple of days, and it didn't feel good at all. And then, so last time, or a fast or two ago, I was trying to memorize all these things. I was really kind of like pushing myself to memorize things. And that was in the first couple of days of a fast. And same thing happened. I really didn't feel good at all. And I think, your brain does use a lot of glucose normally. And when you use it more, it uses more glucose. So now I'm kind of got myself with this philosophy or this rule that I just, in the first few days, I don't strain myself physically or mentally. But I like to be occupied. I like to be absorbed in something, even a good movie. You completely forget you're fasting while you're doing stuff like that. As a matter of fact, one of the great things about fasting is the amount of time you have. It is astonishing how long the day is. And not necessarily because you're suffering, but because it's not being broken up by cooking and eating and cleaning up after. There's no break in the day, really. You can just keep doing whatever you're doing. And it's amazing how much time there is in a day when you're not breaking it up with food. This is a surprisingly good benefit of fasting. One of the other benefits is you're not spending money on food. I mean, think about it. There's so many things that you could do for your health, and they all cost money. Go to a gym, join a gym, buying better food, going to the doctor and getting a checkup, or going to the hospital and getting a colonoscopy or something like that. There's a lot of things you can do for your health, and they all cost money, sometimes a lot of money. And then if you do eventually get high blood pressure or heart disease or cancer or Alzheimer's, that all is very expensive to treat that stuff. And here's something that may help you prevent that stuff that costs nothing, and as a matter of fact, saves you money. It's really amazing. I recommend that you go to my website, adamleekahn.com, and just look up fasting. Or there's a category in the sidebar. Just click on it. There's all kinds of stuff about fasting, studies that have been done on fasting, TED Talks on YouTube on fasting, and stuff like that. There's a lot of information, a lot of studies, and they're doing more and more studies, it seems like to me. And you'll find, if you ask your doctor about this, if you just have a normal, regular doctor, they will probably dissuade you from doing this. A doctor that is versed in doing this, that knows about it and helps people go through fasting, of course, they'd have a completely different view on it. But the medical industry, the medical people in general, have a very negative view of fasting. And I remember, in fact, they were talking about this one result they got from fasting. I can't remember what it was, but it was some, really good positive thing that came from fasting. And they had a doctor on there that said, what we need to do is find a drug that can produce this same effect. And I was thinking, what are you talking about? Here's this perfectly natural thing that doesn't cost anything, and you want to do the same thing with a drug that probably has side effects? It just seemed crazy to me. But that is kind of the general average doctor's point of view on fasting, is it's a bad thing. But it's probably slowly changing. There is more and more research being done on it, fasting, and I think more and more doctors are becoming aware of it. So this is all changing. I mean, you can't blame somebody for being conservative about stuff like this. I felt the same way when I first heard about this. I was like, no, it can't be good. That was my automatic opinion. This can't be a good thing. Fasting cannot be really a good thing. But then if you look into it, and I suggest you look into it, it is an amazingly good thing. And the research has shown that it's true. And there are very few dangers to it, although there are dangers, as there are with anything. Yoga can be dangerous. Matter of fact, I read a book called The Science of Yoga, and it's basically a compilation of all the studies that have been done on yoga since the 1800s. It was really quite a compilation of research, and actually yoga has caused strokes in people before. I don't mean to alarm you if you do yoga. For the most part, it's perfectly safe and actually really good for you. But I remember there was a couple of times when somebody had there's a couple of poses where you put your head really far back, and it can sometimes, if you do it extremely enough and you're flexible enough to do it, it can pinch the blood vessels going to your brain and cause a stroke. It's happened twice, I think, with people. And then there's other things that can happen that are not good. But generally speaking, it's really good for you. But anyway, so fasting can be dangerous for some people in some conditions, in some circumstances, and done a certain way, it can be dangerous. But for the most part, it's a very natural, positive, healthy thing to do. I thought about ending the podcast right there, but then I thought I'll just wait and see if I have anything else to add. And sure enough, I do. So this is the next day. I'm now on my 5th day of a fast, almost to the end of that day, and feeling better today. Not quite so out of energy. And that's one of the things I wanted to mention is that a lot of the literature on fasting says that once you make it past the 3rd day, you feel less hungry. And this is only the second time I've gone past the 3rd day. And that first time, it was definitely the case. By the 4th day, I felt a lot better and a lot less hungry and a lot more energetic. And a lot of people say they feel great. I haven't had that experience yet, but I did feel after that 4th day that I could keep going for a while because I felt just great. But that wasn't the case this time. However, today, the 5th day, I do feel better. So basically, the theory goes that once you get fully into ketosis and you're no longer jonesing for carbs and your body has plenty of fuel, then your hunger level goes down. And I've seen the charts of that hunger hormone, and it rises when you normal meal times, and then it drops again. But then after the 3rd day, it starts to rise less. There's less of that hormone. So that would probably explain why you have less feelings of hunger, but also the fact that you now have plenty of fuel. There's a period there, the first 3 days while you're transitioning over to burning fat, that you probably don't have enough fuel, and so you're feeling really hungry. But then once your body gets into the mode, then you have plenty of fuel. I mean, if you have fat on your body, you have plenty of fuel. So that's one thing to remember is that most people report that you feel better after the 3rd day. The other thing I wanted to point out about that is that there's a lot of people report feeling less hunger when they're fasting than when they're eating less. And I often thought that was just silly. I mean, why would that be? But I saw a really good video on YouTube that kind of explained the simple biology of why that would be. So let's just say you are eating less to lose weight. And so you're eating, say, 1,500 calories a day, and you feel hungry. You're really not, say you normally burn, say, 2,000 calories a day, or normally eat 2,000 calories a day and burn that much, then you're not getting enough calories, basically. But because if you're eating normally, like most people do, with a certain amount of carbs and quite a bit of carbs, then your insulin level is relatively high, and insulin tells your body not to burn fat. So you're only getting 1,500 calories a day. Now let's contrast that with somebody that's fasting, and once they get fully into ketosis, that you can burn as much as you want. There's no insulin to speak of in your bloodstream, and so your body is fully and freely using the fat in your cells. And if you need 2,000 calories a day, then that's what it takes out. So you have plenty of calories. So that's why you would have a difference in the hunger level between eating less, even eating 1,500 calories a day, and not eating anything at all, because you're getting 2,000 calories a day. So I thought that was interesting. As an aside, not really relevant to fasting that much, but I just wanted to share it, is that when you're fasting, you're basically running on fat. That's your fuel. Normally, you're probably running on carbohydrates. But while you're fasting, you're running on fat. And I used to think of that as a secondary fuel, as a not as good fuel. Like I can struggle along with it, but it's really not the best. But then I realized that you can store weeks worth of fat on your body, and you can only store about a day's worth of carbohydrates in your body. Clearly, it's the more important fuel. And your body really has no problem running on fat. It's not like it chugs along. I don't feel like I have a lot of energy, but I think in some ways that is it's like I'm misinterpreting the sensation. I feel like I don't have any energy, but everything that I try to do, I have plenty of energy for. So it's almost like I'm interpreting this sensation in my body as lack of energy, but it's not actually lack of energy. I probably have plenty of energy. I mean, I've still got fat on my body, and my body can take as much of it out of my fat cells as it wants. So I'm literally not out of energy, but I'm interpreting this sensation as being out of energy. And maybe eventually I'll get used to that and learn that that sensation is something else. It's not being out of energy. Anyway, so fat is not an inferior fuel, and in many ways it is a vastly superior fuel for how much you can store and how long you can run on it, and the effect it has on your brain, producing brain cells and all that, everything else. It's in many ways a superior fuel, and also I think it's in many ways more natural to be running a lot of your time on fat rather than carbohydrates, because if you look around, if you let's go for a walk in a forest, and you look around and you see what you can eat there, what carbohydrates you can eat there, you will find almost nothing. And if you knew a lot about the terrain that you're in, you'd be able to find more, but you wouldn't be able to find very many carbohydrates. They are hard to come by, except, at certain times of the year. When the berries are fruiting, for example. But it is not easy to find carbs in the wild. So, and we did most of our evolving before agriculture by a long shot. So we are very well adapted to not getting very many carbohydrates and not really using carbohydrates as a main fuel. Okay, this is now, some time has passed. This is now the 7th day of my fast, the end of the 7th day. And this, I felt today, by far, better than I felt the whole fast. And I think part of it, at least, and maybe all of it, is because I thought about some of the stuff I've said on here about the fact that I have plenty of fuel on my body. So I'm actually, literally, I have plenty of energy, even though I feel like I don't have any energy. And I thought, well, maybe that feeling is just to keep me from wasting energy unless I actually need it. And then I realized, since I do physically have plenty of energy, that I could just act as if I had plenty of energy. And so I started to last night. I just started to act as if I had plenty of energy. And believe it or not, I felt like I had plenty of energy. And today I did some push-ups. I did some squats. I felt better than I have felt the whole time. And so I think, that's one of the things I really love about teaching, is you always learn something when you're teaching. And this today was a really good example. One of the things I realized is that it's kind of like an optical illusion, only a kinesthetic illusion, a body feeling illusion rather than visual. In other words, I'm not out of energy. I just feel like I'm out of energy, or I'm misinterpreting it as being out of energy, but I'm not actually. And it has definitely been proven to be the case today. I have had plenty of energy. I have no problem moving around. The only thing, I still kind of feel lightheaded and get a head rush when I stand up, which is something that you should be aware of if you do fast, that your blood pressure gets lower when you're fasting. And when you stand up, sometimes you get really lightheaded, and people have actually passed out from that. So you just get up slowly. Also, I'd like to add that I didn't have anything to eat, or I didn't ingest anything but water today. Yesterday, I had a third of a cheese stick, like a pepper jack cheese stick, kind of like a string cheese. About a third of that is about 30 calories, and I had 2 of those Nuuns, which is an electrolyte drink. Has 2 grams of carbohydrates in it, in each one. So that was a little something. And I felt so good when I got up this morning. I just decided not to have anything, and I haven't had anything, and I felt fine. So this is a good example of how every fast is different. I mean, really, I was really dragging for the first 6 days, and here on the 7th day, I feel better than I felt the whole time. I actually feel pretty good. For the most part, I didn't even feel hungry today. I mean, a couple of times, like the neighbors were cooking something that smelled really good. But other than that, I didn't really think about eating. I didn't think about food. I didn't feel hungry. I didn't feel without energy. It's amazing. It's just remarkable how different every fast is. But it also is remarkable how much your attitude really makes a difference. So I started immediately walking faster last night when I was like, okay, I'm gonna act like I have energy. And I started moving around like I had energy. And like, for example, previous 6 days or 5 days, if I wanted to get up and go do something, I would really consider it, and I'm just gonna lie here. But today and last night, I just jumped up. Whenever I thought of anything I wanted to do, it was like I was trying to expend energy. And I realized, of course, your body can call on that energy and take as much as it wants. And it only is going to take as much as it needs, of course, because it's trying to conserve it. So it's giving you the sensation that you don't have any energy. But of course, if you were chasing down an animal, your body would find the energy to do that. It would just make it happen, because this is your survival at stake. It's not going to withhold it or be stingy with it when you're trying to get some food. So I just followed that logic, and it turns out that it really made a difference. And by the way, all I said about having plenty of energy, plenty of fat available to burn, plenty of fuel, only really applies after the third day, or only applies after you're fully in ketosis. First few days, you really probably should take it easy because you're transitioning. And my wife and I have both had the experience of really suffering if we burned out too much sugar energy in the first few days. So that all applies after you're in ketosis. I was just in a conversation with my wife, and she made a point that I'd like to share with you, that although fasting can be uncomfortable or just not pleasant sometimes, chemotherapy is really unpleasant too, and it goes on for a long time. It's way more unpleasant than fasting, and it's possible. And the evidence shows that this will probably prevent you from getting cancers, or at least it improves your chances of not getting cancer. At least according, I mean, that's what I think after reading a whole lot about it. And I aim for scientific studies and validatable, substantiated claims. That's just my bias. I'm just a skeptic, and naturally, and there is a lot of evidence that says that fasting will reduce your chances of getting cancer. So if you look at it that way, that you can go through this discomfort, or feeling tired or feeling hungry, as opposed to going through chemotherapy, is no contest. It is way better. So you can think of this unpleasant feeling when it is unpleasant, and a lot of the time it isn't unpleasant. But you can think of that unpleasant feeling as just the ticket you pay to get into the garden of healing. Everything costs something. And this is one of the best things you can do for your overall health. And it doesn't cost a thing. As a matter of fact, it saves you money. I'm now on my 9th day of fasting, and I feel pretty good. I actually woke up this morning feeling better than I have the entire first 8 days. I did something interesting yesterday. I just wanted to do it as an experiment. I had one fried over easy egg, and it was so good. A little pepper, a little salt. It was amazingly delicious, and I've thought about it many times since I ate it, just how much I enjoyed that. But what I found was that I haven't felt any extra hungry. It didn't make me ravenous. That was kind of what I always thought. Like if you started eating something, you'd just be like, now I must eat, and scarf everything down. But I didn't. I ate it. It was really good. It was really satisfying. I mean, I could have easily eaten 10 more of them, but I knew that I was only going to do this one, and so I ate it and I enjoyed it. And it hasn't seemed to have any effect. I'm still in ketosis. Of course, it's only got one carbohydrate or something like that. But the fast is going along great. Just Anyway, but it seemed to give me a kind of comfort that I know that I can do that. If I start to really feel like I need to eat, I can try that. I can just have a single egg and then wait and see how I feel after that. And today I feel great. I actually feel better today than I have the whole time. I was already feeling better. The last 3 days I felt better. Every time I woke up, I felt even better. So, something to keep in mind. It's always an experiment. I did think last night of something that you should know. Some people should not fast. Obviously, pregnant women, someone who's still growing, I think probably shouldn't fast. I'm almost positive a pregnant woman should not fast. But I'm pretty sure someone, that's 16 years old should not fast. 10 years old should not fast. But I don't know that for sure, but it just seems logical. Someone who's already malnourished probably shouldn't fast. And I know that there's certain medical conditions that would make it so that fasting would be dangerous. So if you have a medical condition, you should definitely talk to a doctor about whether or not it's okay for you to fast. One of the interesting things you'll find out when you fast is that your body temperature drops a little. You feel cold. Your hands and feet sometimes feel cold, even though it's not very cold. And on a hot day, you don't feel hot. It's just your body trying to conserve its energy. And this has been measured by people studying fasting. It's just one of the things, and this is a good example of what I was talking about, that the body clearly knows how to deal with a lack of food. It's got a lot of protocols that it puts into place when this happens. And one of them is to try to conserve, in any way it can, try to conserve its energy. So I'm telling you this because if you notice your hands and feet are cold, there's nothing wrong. This is completely normal. Your body actually expends a lot of energy just keeping your temperature what it normally is. And by keeping your temperature just a little bit lower, it probably saves you a significant amount of energy, fuel. It's a smart adaptation. One of the questions I had when I first started fasting is, how long can you go before it becomes damaging? And of course, there's no single answer to that. It kind of depends on how good a health you're in and how much fat you have on your body. And you probably shouldn't push it to the very edge anyway, but I was just curious. And I found there's a book called Hunger by Sharman Apt Russell. And he mentions in there a lot of just interesting things about hunger. But one of the things is these Irish Republicans who were imprisoned by the British outside Belfast, and they wanted to be treated as a political prisoner, but they were just treated as terrorists, basically. And so they went on a hunger strike. Now, how long does it take until they died? So there's and these are probably lean men, given the times is 1972 to 1982, somewhere in there. They don't say specifically the date of that fast, this particular fast. They were just saying that there was a lot of hunger strikes during that period of 10 years. And the first one who died was at 59 days. And the last one who died was on the 73rd day. So that kind of gives you a range of what it takes, how long a human can survive eating nothing. But it also said that doctors have noted that after the 40th day, there starts to be problems. I mean, you don't die maybe until the 59th day or the 73rd day or whatever, but you're already starting to have problems at about the 40th day. Now, there are some orders of Christian monks who fast every year for 40 days. And of course the body can probably stand a little bit of damage, because what the damage they're talking about is vitamin C deficiency, niacin deficiencies, and stuff like that. And also, when you run out of fat, it starts going into your muscles. So there's, muscle loss, which is a kind of damage. But anyway, I just thought that, between 59 and 73 days is how long it takes a lean person fasting to die. I mean, if you can generalize from just 10 examples. On the other side of the story is the true story of a man who survived without any food for 382 days. He was a 27-year-old Scotsman named Angus Barbieri. And this occurred in July of 1966. He was basically he was morbidly obese. He weighed 456 pounds when he started. And the doctors wanted him to try a short fast to see how it would work. And when he got to the end of the fast, he decided to just keep going. And he kept going for 382 days under the supervision of the doctors. And he didn't eat anything except he had tea, coffee, and he took vitamins. And by the time he was done, he weighed 180 pounds. Every once in a while, he did a little something. Like he said, sometimes he put a little sugar in his tea. But the doctors were checking his blood sugar level, and they could tell he wasn't eating anything of any substance whatsoever. So that's the other end of the scale. It really does depend on how much fuel you have to begin with. The practice of fasting is obviously a very ancient practice, and a lot of famous people from time immemorial have said good things about fasting. Benjamin Franklin said, "The best of all medicines is resting and fasting." I like this quote. It's from an Egyptian pyramid inscription from 3800 BC. "Humans live on 1/4 of what they eat. On the other 3/4 lives their doctor." Which leads me to share with you just a little kind of motto that my wife and I have. You're not so much overeating as under fasting. One way to look at it is that you overeat. Another way to look at it is that you underfast. Another one we have is a severe fasting deficiency is the cause of most diseases. And I mentioned earlier the book Catching Fire by Richard Wrangham. He mentions in there that all hunter-gatherer societies that have been studied go for periods of time without any food, usually seasonally and usually for several weeks. Sometimes not just no food at all, but just very, very little, insufficient calories. Sometimes no food at all for periods of time. It's very common, and it's even common in rainforest chimpanzees. It's just very common. So we've been well adapted to it. As a matter of fact, I would propose that our body is expecting it, and it does certain functions only during that time, only during the time you have no food. And those functions are extremely good for your health. So although it sounds kind of funny, a fasting deficiency being a cause of disease is one legitimate way to look at what's happening. People are trying to do something about these modern diseases that people have. Cancer and heart disease specifically. Alzheimer's. I believe it's a legitimate point of view to see those as a fasting deficiency. People look at it as obesity or overeating, a problem of overeating, but you could also see it as a problem of underfasting. I should probably wrap this up. This podcast is getting kind of long, but there's so many interesting things about fasting. And today, I'm on my 10th day and feeling pretty good. One of the things I wanted to share with you is just a few tidbits. The research just keeps coming, and actually there's more research now on fasting than I've ever seen before. And everybody's looking at it in a different way and for different reasons, but it's all really interesting. And here's one, this just came out in this year, 2020. And they're just talking about how they found that intermittent fasting changes the kind of enzymes in the liver in such a way that it helps prevent disease. Here's another one from 2018. This is an MIT study that showed that a 24-hour fast regenerates stem cells and actually increases metabolism. I'm not going to share them all with you. I literally have a huge file drawer full of stuff like this. But this one is from 2019. It was a study that showed that if you exercise before you eat, if you're in a fasting state when you exercise, you get more health benefits from the exercise. If you just start looking into it, you will find a lot of really interesting angles on this, and 99.9% of the ones you'll find show that fasting is really good for your health and good for other things too. Here's another quote from that book, The Only Skill That Matters. The subtitle of that book is The Proven Methodology to Read Faster, Remember More, and Become a Super Learner. It's a really good book. If you are a student, you definitely should read this book. It's really good. If you love to learn, you definitely, and you're listening to this, so you probably do. You should read that book. It's really good. There's so many interesting things in there. But here's a quote from that book. Running on ketones is such a performance boost that many people choose to fast to get into this state. Running on ketones is being in ketosis, so fasting. Fasting are extremely low carb. They were talking about how, there are kind of Olympics or contests for memory contests, and these guys are like athletes. They really pay attention to every little factor that's going to help them increase their memory. And for some of those people, they find that fasting for the competition really helps their performance. The brain works really well on ketones. You hear all the time people saying that your brain needs glucose. It consumes a lot of glucose, and it does. If you're a carb eater, if you normally eat what is now considered a normal amount of carbs, 200, 300 grams a day, your brain is running on carbohydrates. And a lot of times you'll hear experts saying the brain needs glucose. It cannot function without glucose. Clearly nonsense. The brain functions perfectly well on ketones, on fat. As a matter of fact, at least for those who really care about their performance, their brain's performance, some of them think their brain runs better on ketones. One other little tidbit here. This is from an article from 2015. In Germany, where fasting was pioneered by Dr. Otto Buchinger, therapeutic fasting is still popular and offered at various centers. Many German hospitals now run fasting weeks funded by health insurance programs to help manage obesity, while fasting holidays at centers and spas throughout Europe, including Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Austria, are growing in popularity. In Germany, fasting is part of the Naturheilkunde, natural health practice, says Greenfield. It has remained popular because it became integrated into medical practice so patients could be referred for a fast by their doctors. Unquote. A really important piece of information that you should know if you're going through chemotherapy, if somebody you know is going through chemotherapy, they should know about this. It is that fasting before the chemotherapy session can increase the effectiveness of that chemotherapy. Specifically, it can make the chemotherapy toxins kill more of the cancer cells and fewer of the healthy cells of the body. Apparently what it does is the stress of the fast causes the cells to sort of hunker down. But cancer cells do not hunker down. They are ravenous and hungry. So the toxin hits the body while the healthy cells are all hunkered down and not absorbing stuff, and the cancer cells are wide open. So it kills more of them and it hurts, because normally chemotherapy kills a lot of healthy cells too. It's very toxic. And so the the negative after effects of chemotherapy, feeling nauseated and all that kind of stuff, is in part, or probably mostly, because it's killing healthy cells. So this is a really big deal. Look it up. There's plenty of information out there. These are solid studies about how this works. And if you know anybody that's going through chemotherapy, they should know about this. Really reduce the damage caused by the chemotherapy drugs themselves. Okay, I'm on my 11th day, just finishing my 11th day. And I'd have to say this was the easiest day I've had so far in this fast, which kind of blows me away. I know I've read about this stuff, but it's very different to actually experience it. But one of the things I wanted to tell you about was a really good video by Michael Mosley. It's a BBC documentary. It's about an hour long. It's called Eat, Fast, and Live Longer. You can find it on YouTube. And Michael Mosley was concerned about his health, so he did this documentary. He went to he tried 3 different ways of fasting. and he had his blood tested before and after, so he could see the results of it and stuff like that. So that part is really interesting because there were different ways of fasting and they had slightly different results. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is they were talking about a growth hormone that we have called IGF. When you stop eating, IGF levels in your blood drop. And IGF, when it drops, tells your cells to stop dividing and start repairing already existing cells. It's one of the reasons why you are repairing your DNA and stuff while you're fasting. It's because IGF determines growth, right? It stimulates growth. And what stimulates IGF is protein. So when you are eating food, your IGF level is relatively up, which the way they put it in the video is that you put your body into go mode, divide, grow, right? And when you fast, that is put on hold and you start repairing instead, repairing the cells you have. So anyway, there's a lot of really interesting things in that documentary, and it's totally worth watching. It didn't seem right to end this thing without finishing my fast, so I waited until my last day, which was today. As soon as I hit the 14-day mark, I decided that's enough, and I ate a single fried egg, and it was so good. It was ridiculous. Anyway, the fast is over. I learned a lot, as I always do in on these fasts, and it's over now. And I should probably end this podcast too. I hope you learned something. If you'd like to know more, I have more information about fasting on my website. I have a lot of videos on my website, also adamleekahn.com. But that's it for now. This is Adam Lee Kahn on The Atom Bomb.